When things are going well, it's hard enough to lead. But when things aren't going well, it's nearly impossible. Whatever the problem is, you have to acknowledge it, because if you don't acknowledge it, you can't do anything about it. And so as a leader, when you feel like you're screwed, and many of us feel that way from time to time, you have two choices. Choice one:
AI just detonated the old education playbook, and Chegg found itself in the blast zone. In this episode, Dan Rosensweig, CEO of Chegg, former CEO of Yahoo, and former CEO of Guitar Zero and ZDNet, shares what it really takes to lead when your model gets disrupted overnight, how to read the shift before the number collapse, make painful decisions fast, and keep your team focused, credible, and resilient when the pressure is public and personal. So I definitely recommend listening to this episode because there are so many value gems shared by Dan.
I don't know a single CEO that doesn't wake up every day in fear of what AI is going to do to them or their company. I was the first public company CEO to say on CNBC that I thought ChatGPT was going to affect my business. And so I lost 48% of the company's value and my net worth in about 5 seconds. There is no such thing as a balance. If you can't find joy putting that level of work into the company and that relationship you have with your family, don't do it.
What does it mean, reinvention, for a CEO?
Because of my history of growing up in tech.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to a new episode of the World Class Leader Show. And today, very excited to have with me as a guest, Dan Rosensweig, the CEO of Chegg. Dan currently serves as a CEO and is also an investor in Leeds United and a new women's basketball league, Unrivaled. In 2010, Dan joined Chegg with a vision to transform the popular textbook rental service into a leading provider of digital learning services. And Chegg has now become a 24/7 learning partner by offering a suite of high-quality, low-cost, personalized and on-demand educational resources that help students maximize the return on their investment in education and support them on their journey from learning to earning. Prior to Chegg, Dan served as the CEO of Guitar Hero, CEO of Yahoo, and CEO of ZDNet. So Dan is also an important member of the board of directors for Adobe Systems Inc., Rent the Runway, and Yumi. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to talk to you. And I sound very good with that accent.
Dan, let me start with probably a good starting point. And the starting point is you were a CEO for Chegg. And then you step away, and we read the news, at least I did, in terms of, who replace you. But then you decided to join back as a CEO. So first of all, what was the major reason for that? And also, what is maybe one thing that you were trying to stabilize first, and maybe one thing that you tried to reinvent? So what was your idea of coming back?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I did not intend to come back. And I'm very grateful to the CEO that had replaced me, who had been at the company for 17 years, who did an extraordinary job. But I mean, listen, things you want to be known for in business and things you don't want to be known for in business. And so I've got both sides of the ledger. But the one that happened here, I was the first public company CEO to say on CNBC that I thought ChatGPT was going to affect my business. And so I lost 48% of the company's value and my net worth in about 5 seconds. So that was not a joyful moment for anybody. But, transparency and truth are necessary when you're trying to fix things and deal with problems. So I have believed for quite some time that it's really difficult to be a public company with a market cap of less than $5 billion. There aren't research people that cover you. There aren't enough funds. The big funds can't buy you, or they push the stock up. They can't own enough of you to matter. If they own too much of you, then they're in control. And so you end up getting manipulated by what I call the FanDuel of public markets, which is day traders and options and other things. And it's all legal and it's all okay. But it isn't something that makes it easy to build or transform or fix a company in the public markets. I'd also done it for 15 years, that my COO at the time was ready and he wanted to take the reins and I wanted him to take the reins. And I wanted to do different things in my life because I'd had, an incredible career, at least from my perspective. I love the company and he wanted the opportunity to sort of fix it and take it to the next level. And so we made that transition. It was a very natural transition. It had been planned for a while, but it also happened to come at a very difficult time for the company, which is the market cap had collapsed from 14 billion to 150 million, and now it's at 100 million. And not an easy thing to do. And the impact of post-COVID, the impact of the reduction of higher education, the impact of ChatGPT, and then the ultimate one that really hurt the company was Google, and we're suing them for antitrust, blocked 51% of our traffic almost overnight on their new, and the deal with search engines was that you could crawl our stuff and you send us traffic. And that was why the search engine worked. And that was the positive, constructive ecosystem. When ChatGPT came along and Google was behind for a while, OpenAI, they chose to do things that were very painful and difficult for publishers. All of those things added to the difficulty of Chegg. And when I spoke to the CEO, he, after 17 years, had determined that he did not want to do the next transition of the company, which was from B2C to B2B. One of the biggest assets is in Europe. He lives in the United States. And he was very honest and transparent and said, this is not for him. And I talked to the board, and the board said, listen, this is going to be very difficult to find somebody right now. Public markets, stock collapsing, company going through difficulties. And so I felt a moral and ethical obligation as the executive chairman to come back and take the company. I'm actually super excited now that I'm back in the company because there is an opportunity to regrow the company. There is an opportunity to fix the company. There is an opportunity to stabilize the company, which has been stabilized now, both under his leadership and the changes that we just announced. And I think there's an opportunity to create a hell of a lot of value for our owners, our shareholders, and our remaining employees, of which we still have 400. So from that perspective, I've turned it into I should do it to I'm thrilled that I am doing it.
So use the term reinvention. So, and we discussed, before hitting recording. So in the context like this, the one that you described, what does it mean reinvention in terms of for a CEO? Because a lot of CEOs are listening to this podcast and they're going through possibly very similar challenges, like,
Or they're about to.
or they're about to, right?
Look at the announcement today with Google saying they're going to start doing real estate listings, which affects Zillow. This is the challenge. These monopolies are using their power at the expense of businesses that actually built all the content and invested in all the content. So if you haven't faced it, you're going to face it.
Exactly right. So what does it mean then going through a moment of reinvention? For example, through my lens of the work I do, I think about reinvention through the lens of identity. What does it mean you as a CEO, as an individual, as a leader to reinvent yourself so you can reinvent the company? And I know sometimes, that level of deep introspective reinvention is not needed. But I know to me it's a kind of foundation for resetting something for yourself and for the organization. But through your own lens, through your current context, what does it mean reinvention for you?
So on a personal level, which is what I think you're asking rather than the company reinvention level, um, because of my history of growing up in tech, nothing has ever been stable. There's always been another platform, another moment, another area of destruction and rebirth. And so I think constitutionally, I understand it more than most because one of the phrases that I coined a long time ago was in the internet or in tech, but then in the internet, sometimes you're the windshield and sometimes you're the bug. And I have been both. And so on a career level, on a personal level, if you're a CEO that's always been the windshield and all of a sudden you're the bug, that's hard because you've always led from the front. You've always led with stability. You've always led with certainty. And the decisions you make are within that framework. They're not easy decisions, by the way. They're just inside a framework of normalcy, of you have time to think about it, of your competitors are all known and have been known. Whereas in the world of tech, when I took over Yahoo, Facebook hadn't started yet. Google wasn't a thing yet, right? MySpace hadn't started yet. All of a sudden, one day you wake up and there's Google taking on your search engine, and then there's, Microsoft decides to get into the consumer internet, and then the next day there's this thing called MySpace, and then there's Facebook. So I am used to, unfortunately, a world where there's constant change and constant need for reinvention. So as a person, I've learned to deal with the situations in the best way that I can. It may not work for everybody, which is I say, listen, whatever the problem is, you have to acknowledge it because if you don't acknowledge it, you can't do anything about it. And that instead of getting emotional about it, which I have done in my past, um, I say it's just a problem that needs to be dealt with. And so if I need to deal with a problem, how would I approach it if I were approaching it as a problem, not as an embarrassment or not as my wealth is going away, not as the things that actually happen as a result of it, but rather as, is this a problem that I can solve for? And so I look at it and I say, okay, what problem am I trying to solve for? If I can't define it, I can't even try to fix it. The second thing is I say to myself, what's my definition of success? If I do reinvent it, If I do fix it, including myself, what does success look like? And then the third thing is, if I do that, is it big enough to matter? Is it worth the time and the effort for me to invest in myself and what I'm doing? That if I actually affect this, it was worth it. And if the answers are like Chegg, all three things, yes, then I do it. And then I do it with my great mentor, Bill Campbell, if anybody's read the book Trillion Dollar Coach. So I'm in that book because Bill was a personal mentor of mine. I don't know how I got so, I actually do know how I got so fortunate because Bill was, working with Google and working with Jeff Bezos, and it was a life changer, professional life changer. But what Bill taught me about leadership was when things are going well, it's hard enough to lead. But when things aren't going well, it's nearly impossible. And so as a leader, when you feel like you're screwed, and many of us feel that way from time to time, you have two choices. Choice one, say you're screwed and get out. Because if you think you're screwed and you don't think you can do anything about it, you're the wrong leader. You owe it to yourself, you owe it to the company, you owe it to investors to get out. The other one, and I won't use Bill's words, but they were colorful, was shut the you know what up and fix it. And when Chegg was needed to be reinvented the first time, I took over the company thinking I was 6 months away from an IPO. I was 90 days away from going bankrupt. And when I told that to Bill, Bill said, listen, you have two choices. And he gave me those two choices. And he said, which guy are you? He goes, I think you're a guy that shuts the hell up and fixes it. And that's what we did. So once you define it, once you have a definition of success, once you believe it's worth it, the next thing is you got to believe you can do it. And that is when you have to suspend disbelief because doubt creeps in, especially under tremendous pressure and under tremendous change. And especially when you're used to being the winner and you're not the winner at that moment. How you handle that pressure, you got to buy in completely that you and your team can do it. And that's the way I approach it. It could work for some, it might not work for others, but it's worked for me professionally because it turns out every job I've ever had has been turning something around. It wasn't my plan, by the way. I would rather have sit on a rocket ship, but I was just never given those opportunities.
That's great. And look, to me, that says a lot about you. Meaning, you have done the work. You have done the work on yourself to be able to lead in this very specific, challenging time. Which, by the way, as we said, now is always that time. Is always about pressure and
I don't know a
uncertainty.
single CEO that doesn't wake up every day in fear of what AI is going to do to them or their company.
Yeah, and all the other forces they are really
Oh, you've
driving.
got tariffs, you've got economic
Yeah,
forces, you've got
exactly.
public markets that are not doing long-term investment. You've got the average length of a public company CEO of 18 months, right? Like, I mean, look how many CEOs resigned just at the end of this year. Lululemon on this week. It's the demand for immediate response to the stock price versus building an enduring company. It's probably the most difficult challenge. Now, most people look at the CEOs and they say, well, listen, they get paid a lot of money and they signed up for it. And that's true. And we did sign up for it. And so we shouldn't bitch about it. But it is our responsibility to do something about it.
Yeah, and by the way, so all this thing about, and here could be very, very controversial. But if we started to put the money in front of everything, we don't really appreciate and understanding what really CEOs are dealing with. And I know that is important, but I work with a lot of CEOs, and none of them is going through an easy challenge, an easy life, and they're working like crazy to make it happen because they have such a high sense of responsibility for their role.
Nobody should cry for a CEO because of the reasons that you and I know. And we do choose this life, and that's our choice. But it is pretty funny to me that I think every member of the Boston Celtics makes more than 90% of public company CEOs. So we have to put all of this in proportion at this point.
That's also is always about context. So shifting the context so you can start to see things in a different way. Dan, I'm curious because that's something that I see often. So there are a number of CEOs. They'll really be willing to, first of all, they have a high level of self-awareness. So they are aware about themselves, how they're dealing with the situation. Maybe if they're getting too much emotional, or maybe they are able to see what is really missing for them. But also there are a number of other CEOs, regardless whether they're leading a Fortune company or no. They're less self-aware, but also they lead with having their title and their status and their ego upfront. So they don't feel they're wrong. They don't feel that they're doing anything different. They don't feel the need to go through their invention. they didn't need to feel change their identity because their past identity, they don't, that doesn't serve them anymore. How do you see this? I mean, you're gravitating with a lot of CEOs, of course, in your inner circle. Do you see most of CEOs now much more leaning towards an introspective work and understanding better whether they're ready to lead in this new scenario?
That's a phenomenal question. Because of the little universe that I grew up in, which is tech, right? I do know a lot of CEOs outside of tech, and I know a lot of investors, and because I'm 64 years old and I've been around a long time, I've been in tech since 1983. So, I've lived the journey and know all the people and have met all the people. Um, Reinvention is a part of tech no matter what. So, what's interesting is a lot of people in tech, people perceive as having very little empathy. Um, because they see Zuck and they see Elon Musk and they see, all of these people. Um, Knowing them personally, many of them do have empathy, um, and are great people, but their lens is their company. And they can separate out who they are as people and who they are as the leader of their company. And they live in extremely competitive worlds, competitive from money, from ego, from status, from technology, from hiring employees. And what I've seen is there's two kinds of CEOs that survive. Um, the ones that reinvent their company, but it feels ruthless. Um, but they're constantly changing around what's next, and they're brilliant. And then there are CEOs that, um, so they don't really change themselves; they change their companies. And then there are CEOs who their leadership style won't work in this current iteration of the universe, and they either retire, they get fired, or they evolve. And I've seen it all the time. Um, and, in my own personal situation, most of the things that I took over in my career were always the underdog. And my job was to get them to not be the underdog. And then at Chegg, at one point, we were the underdog. We were going out of business. And then all of a sudden, we had a $14 billion market cap and we were the big dog. And I had to do a lot of introspection about what is it like to lead from behind and what is it like to lead from the front. And so I do know a lot of CEOs in my world that are older that have evolved themselves multiple times. They put in the work, they care, they think about it. They are courageous to do surveys of their employees to understand where they have blind spots. Um, and then there are those that are just, they look the part, they dress the part, but they're not the part. They're not authentic. The most important thing that I've witnessed of my friends that have been incredibly successful beyond my capabilities is they are authentic to who they are. So if you're not authentically empathetic or somebody willing to take criticism, suddenly taking it, no one's going to believe it.
Yes.
So you better be one of those CEOs that changes the company and not yourself, and finding people that can put up with you as the leader rather than try to become the better CEO for the kinds of employees that might exist. It's not easy. Most of my friends that have been CEOs have evolved who they are and how they think and how they interact. Um, and their styles evolve with the times because they need to, because people evolved. They're not acting. They're responding to the moment, or they see an opportunity where the moment requires them to be different. And I love them for it.
That's great. And to me, really, that's just music for my ear. Because I mean, especially, we have a kind of a misconception about the tech industry and CEOs leading, unfortunately, like some of the few, famous models that we see there in the market. But behind the scene, what you're saying, essentially, there are CEOs that have done the work in the proper way. And by the way, you know, I can definitely see how it's easy for CEOs to bring in whatever they are dealing with in the current moment, their past identity, their past successes, because it's our own winning strategy. Will work before we think sometimes that's going to work even in the future, and we don't appreciate it when it's
Under stress, we all go to the thing we know how to do best.
yeah,
The
exactly. It's
question
the
is
comfort.
it the best thing to do now? And
Exactly.
that's where the internal conflict comes.
Exactly right. So, and look, for your knowledge, Dan, I'm writing a book for CEOs, is the identity gap at the top. And really, I talked about that. So, the alignment that is required between your leadership, actually, let's call it your identity, your message, and then your presence. It needs to be fully aligned, because otherwise, you're going to say something that is different than what you're standing for example. But first, you need to be aligned with yourself, because otherwise, you're going to lead for the company, you're going to lead for the investor, but it's going to be at some point a clash with your identity, because something doesn't match with who you
Correct.
are, how you want to lead. So I think it's
That's why authenticity matters, because
exactly,
even if you're not going to be, the kind of CEO that every employee wants, at least everybody knows what to expect. And
exactly.
employees cannot perform unless there's a clear vision for where the company is going to go. There's a clear understanding of how their role affects the success of the company. They know that the leader is not going to chase the shiny penny, that the things that they've articulated and the things they've asked us to do as employees, when we do them, we will be acknowledged for them, either professionally, emotionally, or financially. And no matter what kind of leader you are, if you're not consistent with that, your company can't succeed.
So let's move a little more into the leadership aspect. So um, during moment like this, you say, we need to evolve as a CEOs. We need to evolve our own leadership, understanding we are operating in different contexts, different environment. And as we said, for most of CEOs right now is either a crisis or is stabilizing the business because something is about to happen, as we said. From your own personal experience, what kind of leadership is required during moment like this in terms of really how you show up, how you communicate, how you behave, how you do things that maybe you didn't do before? What does it mean for you? What you see as some of the key components that maybe other CEO they might hear from you and say, you know what, I'm gonna embrace this because that's where I'm leading right now, what I'm up for, and there might be a different way for me to reconsider my role as a CEO.
It's a very difficult and relevant and pertinent question right now. I think for most leaders, whether they're CEOs or leader division. Um, so I'll go back to what I said earlier, which is you need to be authentic to who you are, because nobody gets to anoint themselves as the leader. People give you that mantle if you earn it. And so, what I have learned and what I have observed by people better than me is sometimes you need to reestablish yourself. Even if it's to what you've always been, you can't assume that people know, right? Because people would have turned over. People, you haven't done it in a while. You haven't been visible, right? They haven't seen you under stress before, right? They haven't been under this level of stress before. So oftentimes what I see from my best friends that are leaders of much bigger companies, they either reinvent, they don't reinvent themselves, they evolve themselves. Because they have to start from their core, they have to start from their values, their
Yes.
ethics, their lens, how they see themselves, how they see the role of what they're supposed to do. They can evolve it. They can't change it because it's not authentic. So the evolution may be more than enough. And in fact, maybe only what's needed, and probably only what's needed if you're going to lead that company. The second thing is they often reestablish in the minds of themselves and in the minds of their employees what the core values are. They bring everybody together and they say, listen, we're under this situation. We're not going to ignore it. And they're more transparent with things than they otherwise might not have been as transparent about, because especially when you run a public company, you need to be very careful. But for example, we're under threat. And because we're under threat, these are the areas that we need to look at. They're uncomfortable, but I want you to know. So I don't want you to be surprised if you see that we're going to have to reinvent this, or we're going to have to shut something down, or we're going to have to cut costs, right? Nobody wants to hear it. And the instinct is hold it to the last minute so people are motivated to work. The flip side of that is if people understand what's coming, they handle it better. They could start to make better choices for themselves. And maybe they don't give you 100% effort, but if your company's in trouble, my guess is they're not giving you 100% effort anyway because they're scared. And so I go with what would you want if you were doing their jobs? And is that different than what you're giving them? And if it is, I have tried, and my friends have tried to say, what do we need now in terms of communication, in terms of leadership? So you can't suddenly be a nice person if you're a person that's been aloof, but you can be more transparent and you can communicate to people that you're understanding that it's difficult for them, right? You're not sitting there and saying it's too bad, but rather you're saying, listen, these are the facts as they are. And my job is to fix them. And so some of the things I'm going to have to do are things that you may not like, or you may not even agree with. I need to make this decision and I'm going to make the best one I can with the facts that I have. I think people appreciate that more. And as dumb as it sounds, years ago when you used to drive the New York City subway and the train would stop, you would sit there and go, oh, I'm going to be late for work. I don't know why it stopped. Somebody fall on the tracks. Are we ever going to get out of here? And you start to panic. Then they put on these little announcements. There's a red light ahead. We'll be starting in 2 minutes. And everybody goes back to their day. If you tell people as much of the truth as you legally can, and you're authentic about what it is and why it is and what it might mean, people respond better. And so, as I said, I don't know you need to reinvent, but you need to evolve and you need to reassess the facts and say, what is it that I could be doing now within the context of who I am that will make it better for the employees and better for the company?
Great. So that's to me is such a great approach, and really, I really appreciate that, Dan.
Well,
Generally,
I've learned the hard way because, like I said, sometimes you're the windshield, sometimes you're the bug. One day I'm running ZDNet and I sell it for $1.6 billion to CNET. And the next day we're laying off 400 employees because the internet's going away in the early 2000s, right? When I come to Yahoo and one day they're one of the most valuable companies in the world, the next day we drop from 1.1 billion in revenue to 700 million and the company might not survive. One day I think I'm taking Chegg public. The next day we're going bankrupt. Then we go public and Amazon enters my space. I've lived this too many times and I've succeeded more than I've failed, but I also have not succeeded every time. But I'm given the right to come back because of authenticity.
yeah, wonderful. And look, you mentioned about the layoffs. You mentioned without getting into Chegg or other companies. But one thing that we all remember during, especially in post-COVID, was most of the things that you were saying, they were not really what we have seen from the tech industry, right? So we have seen terrible layoff done on a Teams call, or a lot of things done last minute, so lack of clarity, lack of transparency. Do you think that it's not just about CEOs now, but you started to see a shift in the tech companies in terms of leading and working more around the principle that you shared, or you feel like the tech industry is still a little bit behind?
I don't know that they consider themselves behind. So that's important to understand.
Right. Yes.
Also, most companies aren't at their scale. So doing everything on a personalized level is extraordinarily difficult, maybe impossible for them. The one thing that I've just never understood is why leaders say things like we're letting go our bottom 10%. There are multiple constituencies when you do layoffs. Your investors are one of them. Your remaining employees are are probably the most important. Well, probably the most important. And then there are the exiting employees that you owe absolute respect to. But when you group somebody and you say, we're getting rid of the bottom 10% of our performers, you're basically putting a scarlet letter on them that says, don't hire this person, right? Because they're a bottom performer. I just don't think that's true. I think that's a subjective decision made by a middle manager who may or may not like that person, respect that person, need that person, or just wanted to find 10 people they needed to cut. And so I don't know why people have to label people. At the end of the day, the company's making a business decision that affects people through no fault of their own. Because layoffs are not the fault of the employees. They're a reaction to decisions that management may have made that didn't work, or to the conditions in the industry changing that affect what management has to do. And in that world, I think it's more truthful and better to say, look, this is through no fault of their own. And these are great people. They're just in jobs we can't afford anymore or we don't need anymore. Because over the course of the year, you generally let people go that are underperforming. So I don't know what kind of company has thousands of people that are in their bottom 10%, that they let work all year until they lay them off. It just makes no sense to me. And I think it's just a miss by major leaders. And I wish they wouldn't do it. But I do understand why the largest companies, particularly when they're public and they can't say things, right? Because it leaks get out, they affect the stock, then you get all sorts of government regulation and litigation. And so you're stuck between the law and what feels better to do. And when you're a company my size, you can be more personalized, more direct with individuals, certainly at certain levels. It's really hard at those companies and scales. I don't know how they would do it. So I don't blame them. But the part that I just don't understand is why you have to group people as underperformers. There aren't 10,000 underperformers at Microsoft. Or who the hell is your HR department?
No, but it's so true, Dan, and I think is. By the way, even if they are low performers, so I'm gonna even building on what you said. Even if they are low performing in the current company, that doesn't mean they will be actually low performing in other companies. I have seen so many people, really outperform, but just in a different context.
Can I tell you when I learned that lesson? So, and I will give him 100% credit. There's a leader, he's retired now, but he invests, named Jeff Weiner. I think he's the second smartest person I ever met behind Bill Ziff, who was, had a eidetic memory and a genius IQ. So it's hard to top Bill Ziff. Um, but Jeff, pretty damn close. um, and he worked for me at Yahoo, and he ran search and a bunch of other things. He originally was in corporate development and strategy. And so I always knew that I was like the aging quarterback whose job it was to make sure that I trained him up and then get out of his way because he was that extraordinary. But we were having a difficult situation when I first started with an individual who I loved. And I kept pushing that person, why didn't you do X? Why didn't you do Y? Why didn't you do Z? And it became embarrassing between him and me. And Jeff pulled me aside. He said, do you like this person? I said, very much. Why? He said, then why are you embarrassing them? And I said, well, I'm not. I'm just holding them accountable for doing their job. And he said, do you think that person's not doing their job because he or she um, doesn't want to? No. Doesn't like you? No. Doesn't want to be here? No. Then why do you think they're doing it? I said, because I have them in the wrong job. And he said, and whose fault is that?
Great lesson.
Great lesson for me from a young employee who came on and blew through my career and, of course, ran LinkedIn and sold it for $26 billion dollars and is a phenomenal human being and a phenomenal investor. And um, but as a leader, if you have people around you that you trust, it's smart to listen to them sometimes. So, to me, it's very possible somebody's not performing because they're in a job that you put them in the wrong job. It's not their fault. Listen, if somebody's a bad employee and a bad person, you
But
fire
that's
them. You
different.
don't do it as part of a
Exactly.
layoff.
Exactly. Exactly. Don't put the same
You,
eggs,
you label
in the same.
10,000 people because you don't like one. That's ridiculous.
No, and to be fair, to be really fair, I think and I'm not blaming HR as a function, but most of organization they are leading the entire people agenda with their labeling thing in their way of thinking, in their way of acting, which to me is one of the worst things you can do because by the time you start labeling people, you are totally shutting them down in terms of what they can potentially do.
Do in the future and how they feel about themselves. And you create mental anguish when you didn't need to. And it wasn't even true. The last layoff at Chegg was devastating. It was, 42% of the people. And the note was very clear, which is these are people through no fault of their own were running things that we lost ground to because of Google and because of OpenAI, and it can't be fixed fast enough, right? I wish that it could, and but that's the situation. So, there's transparency, there's empathy, but there's also just common sense. What is your objective in letting people go? Is it to brand to an investor that we are ruthless, that we cut 10% of our employees? Well, why'd you hire 10% bad people, right? So, and most of the companies didn't hire 10% bad people.
So much aligned. So I have a last question, Dan. I know you're busy. But it's a question that requires another level of introspection. So many
Uh-oh.
people, no, no, don't be too much worried about it. I mean, I said the context, in probably a little bit too much, but no, it's not an easy question, but it's an important question. So what does it mean? So we talked about leadership and what is the implication of leadership in the current times, but what's the implication personally for CEOs? What people don't know about CEOs living, not anymore leading an organization, but behind that, living in a moment like this? What is the implication to themselves as an individual? So it's an
You
easy
mean if
life
they
to
choose to
have.
retire or
Well, retired, or what's the implication? I had one CEO of one of large company in the US. He said, I realized that now you're retired. He said, now I retired, and looking back, I can see how demanding was their job as CEO, and how I, for example, prioritize work to family or to health. So what do you think is the implication of leading right now in this context for a CEO?
obviously there's no universality behind it. If you own a company, it's one thing. If it's public, it's another thing. If you're already wealthy, it's another thing. If you're in debt, it's another thing. I mean, there's so many variables. Um, but the one thing I am certain on through my network of people and through myself on more than one occasion when I retired originally from Yahoo, I think it took me 2 years of mental and physical recovery when I left Yahoo. I would go to bed at 1:30 every night, get up at 5 o'clock every morning, fear Facebook, fear Google. Um, we were in, 127 countries. It was 24/7. I can tell you that the mental health issues that surround the level of stress, and particularly when you genuinely care about people, the effect that the decisions you make have on people, and then you care about your investors and when they came in, are they making money, are they losing money? I mean, and you have Glassdoor, and you have all these places where you're being rated and ranked and talked about every day, even in the smallest of companies. It feels like an anvil is sitting on your head. It can feel overwhelming, and it can be overwhelming. And not everybody has a family, and not everybody, I was fortunate to have a family. But the 5 years of Yahoo were the most amazing professionally, and working with, Terry Semel and Jerry Yang and David Follow and Zod and Jeff Weiner and Toby Koppel and all these Libby Sartain, all these amazing people that I got to work with, the late great Dave Goldberg at Yahoo. I will look back at that as one of the greatest, most inspirational 5 years of my life, Sue Decker. But the physical and mental drain that it took out of me, I don't know how I did it, and I don't want to do it again. And so part of that was my age and inexperience and dealing with the pressure of the first industry that was truly 24/7, right? The internet was 24/7 in the early 2000s, and you were in the press every day when you ran something like Yahoo. And what I would say is, we choose these professions. If you choose it and you're chosen for it, just know there is no such thing as a balance. There is, though, you get to make a choice. And the choice is, where do you find joy? If you can't find joy putting that level of work into the company and that relationship you have with your family, don't do it. It's unbearable and it will destroy things bigger than your company. You can do both if you're honest about what it takes to do both with all the constituents, including your family. And I was fortunate to work with a group of people that allowed me to find as much balance as I could, even though it was 24/7. So, I know a lot of people listen to this were in YPO. I was in YPO, and YPO loved me in the forum, but hated me in the rest of it because I was the COO of a $40 billion company. And when we had earnings on Tuesday, I couldn't come to the education session. I'd do earnings. Like, you have to make choices. The times that they overwhelm me are when I won't acknowledge that these are tough choices to make. And I don't tell everybody the choice that I'm making. So now I'm very transparent. This is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. Course correct me if I need it, but just know that this is what I'm doing. And people at least appreciate it, even if they don't like it.
Oh, that's great. Such a wonderful message, and also a moment of truth and vulnerability from you, Dan. So thank you. Really appreciate it. So 30 seconds, what you want to bring Chegg to now. So 30 seconds, what's your ambition?
We think the company is extraordinarily undervalued. What we're going to do is reestablish the company focusing on skilling rather than homework help, which is the skilling part is what people now need more than homework help because they have other sources for it. But the fear that every college kid has of getting a grade has now transformed into the fear they all have of getting paid. What are they taking? How does it make me employable? Can I be employable? Help me learn the skills that I need that I'm not learning in my classroom, or transform what I'm learning into my classroom into employable skills. And so we have the opportunity in the next 10 years to reinvent how we serve the student because their needs have changed. and it will take us some time, but we're going to get there.
Great ambition. I love, CEOs have such a strong ambition. So, Dan, thank you so much for being on the episode. So it's been such an incredible conversation. I know a lot of CEOs that will take a lot of value from this.
Well, I'm grateful for you, and I'm grateful for all the other CEOs that are out there, doing what they can to create opportunity and hope. The way we get rid of hate in the world is we give people hope. And the way we give them hope in America is we give them opportunity, we give them jobs, we give them fair wages, and then they can balance their own lives and provide for their family or whatever it is they want to do. And so the CEOs that are out there trying to create jobs, trying to create opportunity, trying to create wealth, those people are doing great work, and I'm grateful for them.
Amen to it. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much.